Hey everybody, and welcome to another lecture with Coding with Roby. And in this lecture, we're going to be going over the Production Database Introduction. So production databases, what are they and how can we use them? In this section, we'll be going over installing a production relational database for your application. The two DBMS, also known as database management systems, we're going to be going over in this series include MySQL and PostgreSQL. Both database management systems are used widely throughout enterprise applications, and really with either DBMS, you cannot go wrong. But before we jump in discussing the two different types of DBMS systems, let's take a minute to discuss the difference between SQLite and a production DBMS. Production database management systems versus our SQLite database. So to start, SQLite strives to provide local data storage for individual applications and devices. SQLite emphasizes economy, efficiency, and simplicity. What this means is that SQLite is easy to use and easy to set up. There is no complexity to using SQLite. It is literally on the same server of your application, which makes it very efficient for applications. SQLite also is a great database for small and medium-sized applications. When I make a new application, I always start with SQLite. This is because it is so easy to set up and it's so quick. Once an application starts with SQLite, you can always expand it to use a production database. And lastly, SQLite focuses on different concepts than a production database management system, which again includes the efficiency and simplicity of use. So what about production databases? MySQL and PostgreSQL focuses on big differences compared to SQLite. These production database management systems focus on scalability, concurrency, and control. These production databases can grow more efficiently and typically offer better stability than SQLite. But this only comes into play when dealing with many users. If your application is going to have tens of thousands of users, it may be wise to switch to a production database management system. If your application is starting off with a small amount of users, you can definitely use SQLite. And if your application begins to get huge momentum, you can always scale your application into using a production database management system if you start with SQLite. So what are some production DBMS keynotes? SQLite runs on an in-memory or saves to a local disk, which allows development of a SQLite database to be easy and part of your application. So how do production DBMSs run? Well, production DBMSs run on their own server and port, which means you need to make sure the database is running and you have authentication linking to your DBMS. For deployment of a SQLite database, you can deploy your database along with your application. However, for a production DBMS deployment, you will need to also deploy the database separate from your application. This makes production databases more work in the long term, which is another reason why you don't really need to use this if you're not gaining a lot of traction. Now, I'm not saying to not use production databases if you have a small application. You absolutely can use these for small apps. It just may be easier to start with an in-memory or local disk database for the beginning. So what will we be covering in this section? Well, we'll be going over two different production databases you may want to use in your application. These include MySQL and PostgreSQL. We will learn how to set up the tables and data within both of these production DBMSs. We will connect the production DBMS to our application. And finally, use our application to push data to these databases. Pretty cool, right? We will also be covering all CRUD operations so we can fluently control data from our application to our production database. All right, well, this wraps up this lecture, and I will see you in the next video.